Welcome back, everyone, to day 2 of e-learning. Today we're going to be looking at Tuesday's weekly tutorial. So please make sure you've tried the problems on your own before you start to watch the video, because that's a great way for you to assess, do I understand these problems or do I need to keep practicing this concept? So before you get started, make sure that you have your weekly practice, you have a pencil to correct any mistakes that you need to correct. And let's go ahead and get started with question 1. Let's take a look at question 1. So number 1 says an airplane is traveling 1,345 miles and it takes 8 hours. So we know this 1,345 miles is important and that it takes 8 hours. How many miles is the airplane traveling per hour? Okay, so before we even get started on this problem, I've already noticed a typo. So traveling right here and here are both spelled wrong. Traveling should only be spelled with one L. This was not my typo because I took this from another teacher, but I should have double checked spell check. So I apologize for not doing that. Okay, now let's get back to the problem. So when we see this per hour, we should be automatically thinking unit rate. That should have been the first thing that popped in your mind. And then if we're looking at this, an airplane is traveling 1,345 miles and it takes 8 hours, but we're trying to get down to 1 hour. So we are having to take our miles and divide it by the number of hours. And I will tell you, this is not a realistic problem. Airplanes can travel much, much faster than this actual, unless maybe it's like one of the small planes, not like a jet or anything. So 8 cannot go into 1, so we have to go 8 into 13. We'll go in there one time. Subtract 8, you have 5 left over. Bring down your 4. 8 goes into 54 6 times. That will 8 times 6 is 48. You have a remainder of 6. We're going to drop down that 5. 8 goes into 65 8 times, which makes 64. We still have a remainder, so we're going to add a decimal and a 0, bring it down. That gives us 10. 8 will go into 10. Oh, and don't forget to bring that decimal up. Some of us forget to do that, and then we have the wrong answer at the end. We'll go in there one time with a remainder of 2. So we're going to add another 0, bring it down. 8 will go into 20, and I'm running out of room, so I'm actually going to move it over here. 8 will go into 20 twice, which makes 16. And then we have 4 left over. We're going to add another 0. I'm going to extend this line. Bring the 0 over here. 8 will go into 45 times. And now we have nothing left over. Sorry that I ran out of room, but just so you can see, we went from here to here. Remember, you can pause the video at any point. So our final answer would be 168 and 125 thousandths miles per hour. And I actually looked up because I was curious how fast airplanes actually fly, and that's why some math problems don't make sense, because like a normal plane that you would get on at an airport and a traveler's plane can actually average flies about 575 miles per hour. So this may be one of those little single pilot planes that you see over at the Thadden. Okay, moving on to the next question. Okay, question 2, round the number below to the nearest tenth. So then first thing we have to know is, where is our tenth place? If we start by looking at our decimal place value chart, we know the number behind the decimal place is the tens place, so we're looking at the 7. But then we also have to remember our rounding rules. So 1 through 4, 4 or less, you're going to round it down to the lower number. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 is going to be 5 or more. You're going to round it up, and they give you examples over here. So to round to the tens place, we have to actually look at the hundreds place. So the 8 is going to tell the 7 how to round. So an 8 is on this side of your coaster. So we're going to round it up to the next number, because if you think of it, a great way to think of it in my head is, if I take this number, is it closer to 6 and 8 tenths or 6 and 7 tenths? Or you could think of it as 6 and 80 hundredths or 6 and 70 hundredths. Well, it's going to be closer to the 6 and 80 hundredths. So this would round to 6 8/10. Question number 3, we are going to find the difference, and we've learned throughout this year, and you've learned from probably 3rd or 4th grade, that difference means subtraction between 9 1900ths and 6 832 thousandths. Just like adding, when we are working with decimals, we have to line the decimals up. So we are going to line our decimals up first. So our 9 is in our ones place, and so is the 6. So the ones place has to line up with one another, and that will line up all of your other place values. And as you see above the 2, there's nothing. And remember, we talked about when you have nothing, we need to add a 0 place value. So now we're going to have to do some borrowing because we cannot subtract 0 minus 2. It will give us a negative number. So we are going to borrow from the 9, make this an 8, and now this becomes 10. 10 minus 2 is actually 8. 8 minus 3 is 5. And then once again, we have to borrow because we cannot do 1 minus 8 without getting a negative number. So we're going to borrow from the 9 and make this an 8, and now this becomes 11 minus 8, which is 3. Drop your decimal down, and 8 minus 6 is 2. And a way that we can check to make sure our answer is correct is by actually going back and adding the two numbers to see if when we add them, we get the 9 1900ths. So if I add these two, 0 for 10, that would give me a 9. This would be 11, and this would give me a 9. And check, check. So my final answer is 2 358 thousandths. Okay, we are now looking at question 4. Hopefully you've noticed there's a pattern this week that is all about those decimals. We're really working to understand these decimal operations and get them fluent in our brain. Fluent means that we can do them without really having to think about it, that it's just natural how we solve them. Okay, so for this equation, we have that y is equal to x plus 12 7/10. So when we do these problems, remember we are taking whatever they're telling us x is and substituting it in here. So here I'm going to substitute in 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8. So I'm actually going to write it underneath each one. So we have 12 7/10 plus 0, which we know is 12 7/10. Okay, on the next one, we have 12 7/10 plus 2. And this 2 is at ones place 2. So we need to make sure that we line up where our decimal would be. Because if I needed to put a decimal where that 2 would be, it would be behind the 2 with a 0. And this would be 14 7/10. And some of you can do this in your head, and that's completely fine. I'm just wanting to show everyone the steps if needed. So then you have 4. So same thing, you have 12 7/10 plus 4 wholes. So this would be 7, 6, so it would be 16 7/10. And the next one, you would have 6. Same thing. Your 6, the decimal would be behind the 6. And if we add this, we get 7. We have 18 7/10. And I'm using different colors to kind of help us stay a little organized. So, and then we have 12 7/10 plus 8 wholes. So the 7/10 is still there, but this time it's going to carry, and it's going to make 20 7/10. Okay, well, that is the end of Tuesday's weekly practice. Let me know if you have any questions. Just leave them in the comments section. But before you leave, let's go over the expectations for your first day of e-learning. So your to-do list today is to complete your weekly practice and check your answers for Tuesday. Number 2, complete the tables, graph, and equations worksheet I gave you last week. If you do not have a copy of it, I have attached a copy to today's weekly practice. Second, check in with Miss Gillum. There will be a check-in, and in that check-in, you are going to send me a photo of a certain problem on the worksheet so I know that you completed it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments or send me an email at agillum@bentonvillek12.org.